Good afternoon. It is Friday the 25th of October, 12:30 when I'm doing the show. Been off for a week and it's good to be back, and I'd just like to say a big hello to everyone in the magnificent Wairarapa and the beautiful Hawke's Bay. It's good to be back and amongst you again. I had a little time out with my friends and we got up to the Coromandel and managed to snag a few snaps, which is always nice, and spent nearly a week in Auckland watching the World Cup and getting on it with my mates, and it was really a great time. And if you haven't been to Auckland recently, you really need to go. It has become a country within a country, similar to what London is to England. You know, it is charging ahead like you wouldn't believe, and I understand why a third of the country wants to live up there, but there is always, of course, a problem, that choking chaos of people and traffic everywhere. And, you know, I look out my window on a Sunday and the only thing missing from the main streets are tumbleweeds. It's, you know, a mighty quiet place, and I often wonder why on earth people would not move to a town like mine, Pahiatua, where you can still pick up a 3-bedroom house at reasonable nick for 200 or less thousand. And, you know, I always run through the sums in my mind about how someone could be freehold, you know, decades earlier than taking on a massive mortgage and sitting in traffic all day, every day. There's a lot to be said for small towns, and I do love them. Masterton has grown like you wouldn't believe, and, you know, every town has been through it. Martinborough, Greytown, Carterton have all fired, and even Fairley now is starting to really pick up. And I must admit, I haven't been up to the beautiful Hawke's Bay for a while, but as I understand it, they're really charging ahead up that way too. So, you know, there is a lot going on, and I really would try to encourage people to at least consider a life in these small towns where people just have that much more time and seem that much more polite. In a big city where there's a lot of people, folks tend to treat you in a very offhand way and have very little time for the care and consideration of others, and that exacerbates problems like those who are suffering from mental health issues, which of course is what my show is all about. And, you know, those who are addled with drugs and homeless and struggling, they tend to find it tougher in bigger places where there are more people. We just don't seem to have time to care for those people. Now, before I started my show, I kind of have a little run-through of what I'm going to say, and it occurred to me that I should make a point about why I do what I do, because I don't get paid for this. In fact, I'm on a benefit, and it costs me to do this show. It comes out of my food budget, what little I have. So I sacrifice to do this, and why? Why on earth should I? Well, the simple reason is that I believe in community, as does Arrow Radio. The sponsors, New Zealand On Air and all the rest of them who support us, Wairarapa TV, who does such a great job and has brought us to a wider audience, and especially the folks at Arrow Radio themselves, Michael and Veronica, who work so very hard to make this happen and keep it going. And you know, all of us are focused towards improving our communities. And so I would like to put it to you that you should really make an effort to go out and support all of the things that are happening in your community. And by encouraging people and becoming more involved in all the things that are going around, you make contact with the people of your community, and you care for it more. You have more pride, more respect, and you look after those around you. You know, we are becoming far too distracted with the internet and TV, and now you've got these smart TVs and all this Netflix and movies, so we don't go to the movies anymore. There's all this drink driving campaign, so people don't drink in pubs anymore. We don't support our local musicians, so they struggle, and so we don't get together to celebrate. And now we got Uber Eats or whatever, where you can get your food delivered to your door. So we are being encouraged by modern society to live in isolation. Even people out and about are just buried in these smartphones, cut off from everybody else, disengaged by the people with the people around them. And it strikes me that we are in this one walker together. Many races and creeds and religions, all different people mixed together, but we are in one walker together, like it or not. So we, as I see it, have two choices. We can either set our sights on where we want to go, where we need to be, and we can paddle together, or we can fight each other and paddle in opposite directions and get nowhere and die in the wilderness and fail. And that's our simple choices. We have each other, and that's all we have, like it or lump it. So I would suggest to you that we should get on with understanding each other, getting a little bit closer to each other, and caring for each other. Teaching your children simple things like common courtesy. That's how you make your community and your world a better place. And those of us who do suffer from mental health appreciate those small kindnesses so much. I don't know if you realise how much of a change you can make to somebody's life with just a little bit of kindness. It doesn't need an enormous effort. You don't have to sacrifice. You just have to recognise that not everyone is as lucky as you. Not everyone has it so good. And you can do just a little bit and make a huge difference. You know, we are starting to turn a corner. We are starting to focus a little bit more on the mental health of people. The way the All Blacks talk now, you know, you listen to guys like Artie Savia, he's such a down-to-earth, genuinely decent human being, and I like the way he talks, and I like the way these boys think now. You know, it used to be a culture of bullying, and now it has become a culture of inclusiveness, and I think surely we can take the lead from our fantastic netballers and our great All Blacks. Those men and women treat each other as equals. But when it comes to our society, we build fences and divide ourselves. I think we need to take a role from our magnificent athletes and realise that they are not just physically great sports people, but they are genuinely decent, humble people, and they make a big difference in their communities everywhere they go. You look at the work that they do in society, surely we can see them as role models and say, hey, that is something that I can get on board with and support. And, you know, if we can do that, we can definitely lessen the suffering for those of us who do suffer from mental health issues, from depression and bipolar. I mean, when you're already down and you see bad things happening in your society, you do tend to despair, but those positive things, on the other hand, tend to lift your spirits and make you think, well, you know, it's not such a stink place after all. We do live in paradise, and all we need to do is be good to each other, and, geez, we can't go wrong. All right, well, time's are ticking, and I guess it's time for another story. I have written some new ones, but today is an oldie, and it reminds me of a very good old mate of mine, Stu McNeil, who is an exceptional human being. Not the sort of chap that you meet every day. He lives off the land, and he's an extremely resourceful individual. He never got all the qualifications at school, but he's proved himself to be a very clever and capable man. And this is a story about when we lived and worked together fishing. And those were wild times. I really struggled, and at the end of the day I had to pack it in, but I sure did get some great stories and have some wonderful times out there. And today's story is Pieces of Silver, just one of those amazing days we were out on the water together, miles and miles from anywhere, just the two of us. And I look back on those days and it does warm my heart. So let's crack on with today's story. This is called Pieces of Silver. The old mate, who I refer to as Tom for short, woke me about 4:30 a.m. one morning in spring. I was staying in a large caravan out the back of his place. We were in the middle of fishing for groper and had a few more tons to land. I sprung out of bed as I knew we had a big day ahead of us. Work clothes were hurriedly pulled on, and I stumbled into the darkness towards the flat deck ute. "All right, mate," said Tom, as he handed me a coffee and fired up the ute. We headed up to the refrigerated container that held boxes of bait and took 6 for the day's fishing. Then we loaded up 140 litres of diesel from the main tank and headed down the road to the bulldozer and the boat. It was still dark when we arrived and filled the tanks and stowed gear. I put on my all-weather overalls and started cutting baits. Barracuda, frozen whole, is easiest filleted solid, but it freezes the hands fast. Despite the numbness and the razor-sharp blade, I worked as fast as I could go. We needed 300 baits of cooter and squid prepared before we reached the fishing grounds. It would take my best efforts to be ready on time, and Tom would accept no excuses. Right on the first hint of light, Tora drove over on his quad bike, ready to back the boat into the sea, using a large metal cradle and a D9 Caterpillar bulldozer. The drawbar connecting the bulldozer to the cradle was about 15 metres long, so it was able to get us in deep enough water from the beach. But beach launches are never easy. Still, Tora backs us into the water with a great puff of black smoke and some consummate skill. Tom kicks over the 2 D4 Caterpillar engines on board and they bark into life on demand. He listens carefully as he warms up the motors for any hint of a problem which must be addressed before we head out. With nothing obviously untoward, he engages the twin Hamilton jets they drive and swing us round to face the ocean. Meanwhile, it's back to baits for me. Head down, but the smell is quite bearable as everything we use has been frozen fresh, and fresh is the key. Tom goes through the motions of checking the gear, first the electronics, then the jets, then a knowing eye over the hauling gear, and finally over me and the hundreds of traces behind me that we will be sending to the bottom in a few hours. Happy that all is in order, Tom opens up the motors and puts on some Johnny Cash as he plots a path down to the fishing grounds. I feel the boat's bow rise to the challenge and try to move in rhythm with her so as not to slice my hands, now rather numb. Tom buries his head in the navigational gear after putting on the kettle, and I have a tiny break as I make the coffee. The sun is rising magnificently today and it lights up the gnarly coastal cliffs, all orange, red and blue, with wisps of mist still licking the gullies. But we have only minutes to take in the view before it's back to toil. For after cutting a few hundred baits, the traces must be baited up and laid out ready for later. We lose no time as the engines roar on and the jets push us along at a good 30 knots. It's not easy getting all the baits ready in time, but I battle on and check all the main lines, floats, anchors, clips, traces and ropes in sequence, exactly how Tom showed me. Everything must run like clockwork, or it could cost us in gear injury, or even our lives, and this is the most dangerous occupation there is. Satisfied that all is in order, I report briefly to my skipper, and he glances over everything himself for satisfaction. "It's good. Now cut some more baits, would you?" is all he has to say, then turns his attention back to the engines and electronics. Out here our roles are very much changed, and it is important we function as a unit. Tom becomes the skipper, and must make decisions quickly and without impedance. I must follow orders with understanding and as quickly as possible. No hesitation or misunderstanding can be tolerated, or the consequences could be dire for us both. At times this necessity tests both patience and friendship, but we both approach it from the angle of understanding so we can work safely and quickly together. The hours pass so quickly, I scarcely have time to have all ready as we arrive on the grounds we call the holes. They are a series of cliff faces rising steeply from the abyss, a place where current is naturally churned up by the changing tides. We have coincided our arrival with the turning of the tide, a time when countless billions of plankton rise from the depths of nighttime to photosynthesize during the morning. They turn the sea a beautiful green with their vast numbers and fill our hearts with expectation. The timing of our arrival is crucial, and the tides are erratic, influenced by more subtle forces than the moon alone. Old skippers, now long gone, taught Tom the secrets of this place decades ago when the Italians and Greeks fished these places. Now that they're gone, Tom is one of the last with the knowledge which is the crucial difference between success and failure. We cannot see the plankton on the fish-finding gear, the electronics not being sensitive enough, but what preys on them is clearly evident. With jaw-dropping clarity, we see 15 to 25 metres deep an uncountable swarm of tiny fish of many different species following up and feeding on the plankton. Most of these fish are never seen by humans, and much of their lives remains a mystery, as this is a truly wild and far-flung corner of the world. What feeds on them is our glittering prize, our pieces of silver. Groper are our target species today, fishing in a depth of approximately 250 metres. Above them are bluenose, a delectable but less valuable species we will also take, and below the groper are bass. A related if somewhat uglier species, the bass are every bit as good to eat and pay the same good money. The more groper we catch, however, the happier we will be. 100 fish for the day is our unspoken rule for a really good day, but they are few and far between. Today looks especially good. Tom snoops around with his electronic gear, cruising slowly over the cliff faces as the sonar shows signs of promise everywhere. We're in no rush at this point, as timing is everything. We must have our baits at exactly the right place and depth to get amongst our prize, so we must sum up our line of attack before we move. During this time, the most incredible transition begins to take place. Until now, we have been tracked by the great royal albatross. They have been soaring majestically high up on the thermals, watching and waiting patiently. Now as we slow, they descend with anticipation of an ensuing feast. And they are only the first wave. Other albatross and mollymawks, a little smaller, arrive on the scene. Half a dozen soon become many dozens of these magnificent masters of the sky. In turn, these attract other ocean-going birds like painted pigeons which swim under the water as if they were flying. Within half an hour, we already have a small city of chattering birds moving expectantly before a bait has touched the water. We come around again along the now plotted course and begin our fishing in earnest. We start by tying an anchor or pick at the bottom of the main line, then lower this by hand until after a few metres we start clipping on traces with a baited hook on the other end. Each main line takes 25 to 33 baited traces over some 50 metres in length. The main line is in turn attached to a rope which is knotted every 50 metres so we can count it out as it descends the depths. This job must be done at breakneck speed, so the anchor finds exactly the right spot on the cliff face where the groper are feeding. Tom must calculate drift as well as drop. Only the experience of thousands and thousands of drops has taught him the right way. As the first drop speeds away, Tom keeps one eye on the sonar as I count out 200 metres of rope, then tie 2 large floats to the top and send them off to mark the drop. Tom marks it for reference on the plotter. We move on to the next cliff face and the procedure starts again, then a third and a fourth. By the time we have finished 4 drops and stopped for a coffee, it's time to go back and start hauling. I hook up the large floats over the davit arm and Tom engages the hydraulic hauler. As the rope tenses, we can feel the groper wriggling on the ends. The myriad of birds seems to anticipate the action as the first few hooks come up empty. Tom unclips the traces and I remove the now used baits and throw them overboard to the noisy waiting birds. But soon we see colour and 6 beautiful silver-grey groper float to the surface, each weighing about 10 kilos. Tom unclips them and I remove the hooks so that they can be gutted immediately. We rebait and drop the line again and slowly motor up to the next line as Tom expertly removes the heads of these great fish with huge thwacks of his large knife. Then he slices the bellies open and quickly removes all of the guts from the beasts and hurls it overboard, and pandemonium breaks out amongst the birds. The huge royal albatross barge their way in, using their hooked beaks to tear at the large livers and other offal before it sinks down. Small groups of squabbling birds are left in our wake, as smaller birds pick off what they can from the albatross. The second line is more successful and a dozen groper come up, and I am soon hard at work on my knees, flushing out blood from the carcasses with a seawater hose and cleaning off the remaining guts. I am soon covered in blood and guts, but I ignore it as this slowly turns into a good day's catch. The third line is better still, with some 20 fish landing on deck, and we increase the pace. The fish are going down the hold as quickly as I can manage, but I have trouble keeping up with the pace as Tom hews and hacks at a mighty rate. At least 3 dozen albatross alone are now squabbling and gorging themselves as we resemble a city of birds on the water. The fourth line, which promises to make our day, starts to come up, but then suddenly straightens and slows, then starts again. Tom and I shoot each other worried glances as we hesitate. We stare down into the depths for answers as the first hooks come up straightened out, as if some massive fish have torn both bait and fish from the traces. A few more great tugs, and it dawns upon us that we are being robbed. We stare down into the green depths for answers, and slowly the huge black shape of a whale comes into view, plucking the groper off the hooks like a bunch of grapes. Stunned at the audacity of these creatures, we are mesmerised for a minute, as we are helpless to respond. "Dirty, rotten bastards," Tom swears under his breath, as the pod of whales starts to ascend, their black and white markings coming into view. Due to their great bulk, our little hooks have no effect on them, and they are free to rob us at will. "Get the gear in as quick as you can," shouts Tom, concerned that we might snag up on a whale and lose some gear. At the same time, I see another whale come up behind us. At 12 or so metres long, it is almost as long as our boat, and it floats right up to the stern, almost touching the jet with its nose. Pilot whales, informs Tom, as I stare, as captivated by this great beast as he is with our boat. We then break into action to retrieve our gear as quickly as possible. As we do so, it becomes obvious that we have been defeated in our efforts, not by the elements or our elusive prey, but a pod of robbing whales. All 4 lines have been similarly decimated, so we are forced to retrieve gear and pack it away as the whales hover all around checking us out. They are so close I can see their eyes, and I cannot help but think there is some undeniable intelligence behind them. What should have been a successful day of at least 100 groper has suddenly been curtailed into only 38 slabs of valuable silver. We managed to retrieve all the gear safely and are forced to turn for home early, beaten by our curious company. We make it back to the landing by midday, seeking solace in the fact that we have at least made wages for the day, but rue the fact it could have been so much better. We will be back there soon to try our luck again, as this was a rare meeting with these Goliaths of the deep. Still, it was an experience that will stay in our minds for years to come. The end. That was one hell of a day, I can tell you. It was the first time I had ever experienced being robbed by whales. It's not a totally uncommon event, and these creatures are so clever that they learn to identify the sound of a boat's engine from many miles away as if it was a dinner gong. And, you know, they are creatures of the ocean, and you must pay them the respect that they're due, and they need to eat. So, although we get passed off at what they do, you got to understand they've got to live too, and we have to share the ocean with all little creatures, so it is what it is. But I must say that although it was a super, super tough job, it was one of the most exciting and enlightening jobs that I have ever had, and I have done many and various jobs all over the world. I've been lucky enough to travel far and wide, and I had no money, so I had to rely on the kindness of strangers from many different countries, and I can absolutely assure you there wasn't a single country I went to where I didn't find the people to be just wonderful and took me in almost as if their own son. And that was true of all of them. The Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, all of them treated me wonderfully well, and I learned a lot about the world. I learned that it's not nearly as bad as what you think it is when you get down to the grassroots level of individual human beings, and that's why I keep going. That's why I'm encouraged to do what I do. Well, that's it for another week. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with another story. Tell your friends and get involved in your community. It's me for now. Catch you later.